Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. The Echo of Scars. The first scar appeared 2 weeks ago, just after I moved into the old house. A faint line, jagged, running across my left forearm. I couldn't remember how it got there. No fall, no accident. Just there, like a fresh memory that my body knew, but my mind didn't. It's just a scratch, I told myself. Maybe from unpacking. I had always been prone to bumps and bruises, especially when stressed, but something about this one felt wrong. The skin around it ached more than it should have. It wasn't until the second night that the dreams started. Dreams that felt too real, too visceral. In the first one, I was standing in a dark hallway, walls lined with peeling, moldy wallpaper, the smell of damp and decay thick in the air. I could hear someone whispering, just beyond the shadows, but when I reached out, the walls shifted. Something sharp grazed my arm, and I woke with a start, heart pounding. Another scar, this one deeper, stretched across my forearm, parallel to the first. My pulse quickened as I ran my fingers over the wound, skin sensitive to the touch. The same spot as in the dream. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but how could I? The following nights, the dreams grew worse. Each one took me deeper into that hallway, each time darker, colder. There was always something lurking just out of sight, a figure obscured by the shadows, watching. And always, the same sensation, a slash of pain, a wound that lingered when I awoke. I had scars across my chest, my legs, my back, as if I were being carved up piece by piece. I couldn't tell anyone, of course. Who would believe me? Not my friends, not my coworkers. The one time I tried, Liz, my best friend, looked at me with concern and said, "Maybe you're sleepwalking. Or scratching yourself in your sleep." It was a logical explanation, but I knew it wasn't true. The wounds weren't accidental, they were precise, deliberate. I could feel the malice behind them. One night, after another round of restless sleep, I woke to find a new scar, this time on my stomach, curving like a crescent moon. That was when I noticed something else. The mirror in the hallway, an old, tall thing that had been here when I moved in, was cracked. A thin fracture that hadn't been there before, running right through the center, splitting my reflection in two. The reflection looked off. My face seemed distorted, twisted in ways it shouldn't be. But it wasn't just my reflection. I could swear something else was in the mirror, behind me, a figure cloaked in shadow, its face hidden, but eyes glowing faintly. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone. But the crack remained. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. The crack in the mirror became a fixation. Every time I passed it, I couldn't help but stare at it, hoping for some logical explanation to surface. Maybe it had always been there, and I just hadn't noticed. But I knew better. The mirror was old, the kind of antique that belonged in haunted houses, with its heavy wooden frame and cloudy glass. It was unsettling, like it had absorbed too many memories, too many lives. I started to avoid it. I'd walk the long way around the house just to keep from seeing that sliver of broken glass. The hallway, too, grew colder, and every night the temperature seemed to drop further. My breath would cloud in front of me, and the faintest of whispers began to fill the air, a low murmur I could never quite catch. It was like someone was just out of reach, speaking words that weren't meant for me but that I could feel, gnawing at my bones. I tried to record myself sleeping, thinking maybe I could catch whatever was happening in the night. But each morning, when I checked the footage, the screen would be filled with static, cutting out just as the dreams began. Only one thing was clear, an outline in the doorway. A shape that stood just inside my bedroom, watching me sleep, only to disappear when I stirred awake. The figure's presence in the footage sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't remember seeing it in the moment, only after. I didn't know what else to do, so I called Liz over again. "Just humor me," I told her as she walked through the front door, her eyes scanning the house like she half expected to see something crawl out of the walls. "Something's wrong here. It's not just the dreams anymore. She listened, her face a mix of skepticism and concern, as I explained the scars and the figure. "Maybe you need to get out for a few days," she suggested, her voice calm, as if speaking to a child. "You've been through a lot with the move. Stress does weird things." I could hear the doubt in her voice, but I didn't blame her. Even I wasn't entirely sure of what I was experiencing. But then I showed her the mirror. The moment Liz saw it, she paled. "That wasn't their last time I was here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer, squinting at the crack. "It's almost like something is trying to come through." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The crack seemed to pulse, like it was alive, stretching ever so slightly as Liz touched the glass. "Did you hear that?" she asked suddenly, her eyes wide. I froze, my ears straining, and then I heard it, the faintest sound of breathing, soft but deliberate, coming from behind the mirror. Liz yanked her hand back, stumbling away from the glass. The breathing grew louder, more insistent. I could see her panic rise, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Maybe it's just the house settling." But I knew better. Something was behind that mirror. And I had the scars to prove it. Liz didn't stay long after that. I couldn't blame her. There was something in the way she rushed out, promising to check in later, that told me she was scared, maybe even more than I was. Once she left, the house felt emptier, but not in the comforting way it should. It felt like the silence had weight, pressing in from all sides, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of wind felt like breath against my neck. The crack in the mirror had grown larger. I hadn't noticed it immediately, but after Liz left, I found myself standing in front of it again, unable to look away. The fracture now stretched from the top of the mirror to almost halfway down, jagged and uneven like some terrible wound. The air around it felt cold, unnaturally so. As I stared, I saw movement, a ripple, like something shifting just beneath the glass. I reached out before I could stop myself, fingers brushing against the cold surface. It felt wrong. The texture wasn't glass anymore. It was soft, almost pliable, like the surface of a pond before it freezes. And then the ripple came again, this time stronger, more deliberate. Something was moving behind it. I pulled my hand back, heart racing, but the surface continued to shift, distorting my reflection until it no longer looked like me. The figure appeared again, just behind my reflection, but this time it was clearer. It wasn't just a shadow. It had form, thin, hunched, and its eyes, black, hollow pits where they should have been. My breath caught in my throat as it raised its hand, fingers long and spindly, reaching out. The hand touched the inside of the mirror, pressing against it, as if it were trying to break through. I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What do you want?" I whispered, though I didn't expect an answer. But the figure tilted its head, its empty eyes locking onto mine. And then, for the first time, I heard it, a voice, low and raspy, whispering from within the mirror. "You called me." I froze. My mind raced back to the dreams, the strange pulls of consciousness that had dragged me into this nightmare. But I had never called for anything. I had never asked for any of this. The figure pressed harder against the glass, and the crack grew wider, spreading like veins of black ice. "I did not call you," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. The whisper came again, more insistent. "You did, and now I'm coming." The mirror shook, the fracture spreading wider with a sickening crack, and I knew, whatever it was trying to get out. The shadows around the room seemed to stretch and shift, creeping toward me as if drawn by the mirror's power. I turned and ran, slamming the door to my bedroom behind me, heart racing, breath coming in ragged gasps. But I could still hear it, whispering, breathing, scratching at the door. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in the house. The scratching against the door grew louder, more insistent. My hand shook as I backed away, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for it to burst open. My breath was ragged, each inhale harder to control than the last. Whatever it was, whatever I had unknowingly called, was no longer trapped in the mirror. It was loose. And it was coming for me. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to think, trying to understand what was happening. This was impossible, but the scars on my body told a different story. My mind raced back to the first dream, the cold hallway, the whispers. It had been coming for me all along, and I had been too blind to see it. But why? What had I done to deserve this? The door handle twisted. Slowly, methodically. I held my breath, heart hammering against my ribs. The door didn't open fully, it creaked just enough for a sliver of darkness to leak through. And then I saw it, the hand. Long, thin fingers, stretching around the edge of the door, gnarled like the roots of a dead tree. They scraped against the wood, the sound sending chills down my spine. The hand gripped the doorframe, and with a low hiss, the door began to open wider. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The figure that had once been behind the mirror was now standing in my doorway, its face still hidden by shadows, but those eyes, those hollow, endless pits, were locked onto mine. "You invited me in," it whispered again, its voice like dry leaves rustling in a graveyard wind. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating, as if the house itself was closing in, trapping me in its grasp. I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. My mind was a whirlpool of fear and confusion, but one thing was clear, this thing believed I had brought it here. The scars on my body throbbed in response, as if answering its call. The figure took a step forward, its movement slow but deliberate. Every inch it moved seemed to bring the room to life, the shadows twisted, the walls creaked, and the temperature dropped even lower. The figure raised its hand, and I saw its fingers flex, sharp nails glinting in the dim light. "Pain is how we cross over," it said softly, almost gently. "You feel it in your dreams, but I can make you feel it when you're awake." I staggered backward, nearly tripping over a chair. The thing in front of me wasn't bound by the rules of reality, it had bled into my life through the scars, through the dreams. And now, it wanted to finish what it started. Desperation clawed at my throat. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking as the last word left my lips. It paused, as if considering my question. Then, slowly, it extended one of its fingers, drawing it across the air in front of me. A sharp sting blossomed across my cheek. I reached up instinctively and felt a fresh wound, blood welling up under my fingers. It whispered, "You are mine now." And then, the mirror behind me shattered. The sound was deafening, glass exploding outward in all directions, as if the entire house had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I felt shards cut into my skin, but the pain barely registered, drowned out by the terror surging through me. The figure lunged, faster than I could react, its cold fingers closing around my throat. The world went dark, but before I lost consciousness, I felt it, an unbearable, searing pain, one that I had only ever experienced in the deepest corners of my nightmares. But this time, I wasn't dreaming. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Silent Howl. The night was colder than usual, the wind creeping through the cracks of my old house. I had grown accustomed to the howling winds outside, but that evening, something felt different. My dog, Baxter, a large German shepherd with more courage than most men, was on edge. He paced back and forth, his nails clicking against the wooden floor, ears perked, and eyes locked on the front door. I had no reason to be nervous. The house was nestled far from town, surrounded by thick woods. I liked the solitude, but tonight, the shadows in the corners fell deeper, as though something was watching. I stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. There was nothing to see, just the familiar silhouettes of trees swaying in the breeze. Yet Baxter growled low and continuous, a sound that raised the hair on my neck. "Relax, boy," I muttered, giving him a reassuring pat on the head. But he didn't relax. His growl deepened, his body rigid. His gaze never left the door. I stepped back, uncertain. There was no sound, no footsteps, but someone was out there. I felt it too, a pressure building in my chest. Suddenly, Baxter lunged toward the door, barking furiously. His deep bark echoed through the empty halls, louder than I'd ever heard. I rushed after him, my heart hammering in my chest, and yanked him back by his collar. He resisted, snapping and growling as if his instincts had taken over. Whatever was out there had him terrified. "Calm down," I shouted, pulling him away from the door with all my strength. He wouldn't listen. His growls turned into high-pitched whines, desperate and panicked. I'd never seen him like this. Finally, I managed to drag him back to the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind us. I locked it, more out of instinct than logic. Baxter circled the room, still barking but quieter now, like he knew something was close. Too close. Exhaustion weighed on me. I collapsed onto the bed, still listening to his whimpers. It's probably just an animal, I told myself, though I didn't believe it. The woods were full of creatures, but none that made Baxter act this way. Slowly, his barks died down, replaced by silence. I pulled the blanket over my shoulders, my eyes drooping as sleep took over. The last thing I heard was Baxter growling one last time, his voice fading into nothingness. When I woke the next morning, the house was still. A faint light filtered through the curtains, and the wind had died. I sat up, feeling groggy and unsettled. Something was wrong. I glanced around, and my heart froze in my chest. Baxter was gone. His usual spot at the foot of the bed was empty. But worse, his collar, the thick leather one I had always kept on him, was lying on my pillow, right next to my head. I stared at Baxter's collar, my mind racing to catch up with reality. How had it ended up on my pillow? Baxter never went anywhere without it. The weight of dread settled in my stomach like a stone as I clutched the collar in my hand, running my fingers over the familiar worn leather. I stood up, calling his name. "Baxter." My voice cracked in the silence, but there was no response. The house felt eerily empty, as though it hadn't been lived in for years. My first thought was that maybe he had slipped out of the house in the middle of the night. But the front door was still locked. The windows were closed. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken glass, no scratch marks on the door. It was like he had simply vanished into thin air, leaving only his collar behind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong. I moved through the house in a daze, checking every room, every corner. Nothing. Not a single trace of him. Panic gripped me. Baxter had always been by my side, loyal, protective, and now, he was just gone. My thoughts raced back to the previous night, the way he had barked, the way he had growled at something outside. I rushed to the front door, flinging it open, half expecting to see him waiting on the porch. But the porch was empty. The woods stretched out before me, quiet, almost too quiet. The wind had stopped, and the usual rustling of leaves and distant sounds of wildlife were absent. The silence was suffocating. I stepped outside, feeling the damp morning air on my skin. "Baxter." I called again, louder this time. The echo of my voice bounced back from the trees, mocking my desperation. Still, no reply. I didn't want to admit it, but something unnatural had taken him. I could feel it. I decided to search the woods, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, even though the daylight was enough. I needed to be prepared. The woods behind my house had always been unsettling, but today they felt hostile. Each step I took seemed to make the ground beneath me squirm. Twigs snapped, the air thickened, and the shadows between the trees seemed to stretch longer than they should. As I ventured deeper, my footfalls became slower, more hesitant. There was a sensation in the air, like I was being watched, followed. But whenever I turned, nothing was there. Just more trees, standing tall and ancient, as though they were keeping secrets of their own. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, something moving through the underbrush. For a second, hope flared in my chest. "Baxter?" I whispered, holding my breath. The sound grew louder, like someone, was approaching. But it wasn't Baxter. A low, guttural sound filled the air, something between a growl and a hiss. It was close, too close. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the flashlight in the direction of the noise. The beam cut through the shadows, landing on a figure, a dark, twisted shape just beyond the tree line. I couldn't make out its form, but the silhouette was wrong, distorted. Its limbs were too long, its movements too unnatural. My blood turned to ice as it slowly stepped closer, eyes gleaming in the dim light. And then, in a voice that chilled me to my core, it spoke. "Your dog won't be coming back." I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand as those words hung in the air. My heart hammered in my chest, my mind refusing to accept what I had just heard. It couldn't be real. Nothing about this was real. Baxter was just a dog, loyal, brave, and incapable of being taken by something like this. Yet the thing in front of me, its voice still echoing in my ears, made reality twist in ways I had never imagined. I stumbled backward, unable to speak. The creature stood at the edge of the trees, its silhouette barely visible, but its presence was suffocating. My mouth was dry, but I forced the words out. "What do you mean? Where is he?" It laughed, a sound so unnatural it made my skin crawl. The laughter wasn't human. It was like the wind itself had turned against me, mocking my fear. The shape in the shadows shifted again, growing taller, its twisted limbs stretching toward the sky as if the woods were part of its domain. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt trapped, rooted to the spot like the trees around me. "He's gone," it whispered, the words like a breeze scraping against my skin. "And soon, so will you." I forced myself to turn and run. My feet finally responded, but the forest had become a maze. The trees closed in, branches whipping across my face as I sprinted blindly, the flashlight flickering in my hand. Behind me, the creature moved without sound, but I could feel its presence. It was everywhere, in the air, in the rustling of leaves, in the very earth beneath my feet. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. Baxter's absence weighed on me like a physical ache, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I burst through the trees and stumbled into a clearing, panting, my hands shaking as I dropped the flashlight. I bent over, gasping for breath, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic mix of terror and confusion. There was no way out of this. The woods, the house, whatever was hunting me, it was all connected. I could feel it, a creeping sensation that crawled up my spine. Something ancient and malevolent had taken hold of this place. That's when I saw it. The collar. Baxter's collar, lying in the middle of the clearing, just like it had been on my pillow. My heart sank as I approached it slowly, every fiber of my being screaming that this was a trap. But I couldn't stop myself. I knelt down, picking up the leather collar, my fingers trembling. It felt cold, unnaturally so, like it had been left out in the frost overnight. That's when I noticed it, a faint, dark stain on the inside of the collar. Blood. I scrambled to my feet, my stomach lurching. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just toying with me. It had Baxter, and now it was after me. But why? My mind raced as I tried to piece together what was happening. That's when I heard it again, the voice, soft and insidious, slithering through the trees. "You should never have come here," it whispered. "You belong to the woods now." The shadows around the clearing seemed to pulse, shifting and swirling as if alive. And then, from the darkness, something began to emerge. It was no longer just a silhouette, no longer hidden by the trees. It was here, stepping into the clearing with me. Tall, gaunt, its body twisted and contorted in impossible ways, with eyes that burned like cold fire. I couldn't look away, even though every part of me screamed to run. The creature tilted its head, studying me with those burning eyes. "You'll join him soon," it said, its voice like the cracking of branches in the wind. The creature loomed over me, its grotesque form silhouetted against the darkening sky. The air grew thick and oppressive, and I struggled to breathe. Every muscle in my body screamed for me to flee, but I couldn't move. Those eyes, icy, glowing, filled with a hunger older than the woods themselves, held me in place. My mind raced, searching for some way out, but I knew there was none. Baxter was gone, and soon, I would follow. "What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely more than a whisper. My throat was tight with fear, the words tasting like dust in my mouth. The creature didn't answer immediately. Instead, it moved closer, its twisted body making a sickening sound with each step, like bones cracking under pressure. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a grotesque mask of shadows and shifting forms, impossible to focus on. But I could feel its malevolent intent, deep and penetrating, like it was peeling away the layers of my mind, exposing every fear I'd ever had. "You're just the beginning," it hissed, its voice now a chorus of whispers, like dozens of unseen things speaking at once. "This land, this place, it feeds on those who wander too close. You were warned, but you ignored the signs. I don't understand." I shouted, the desperation in my voice cracking. "I didn't do anything. I didn't." "It's not about what you did," it interrupted, its eyes narrowing. "It's about what you were meant to do. You brought something with you when you came here. You opened the door." A cold dread washed over me, colder than the creature's breath against my skin. I thought back to the house, to the strange pull I had felt when I moved in. The sense of being watched, the dreams I'd had, always featuring something lurking in the woods. Baxter had sensed it long before I had, but I hadn't listened. Now, I was trapped. I had let this thing in, whatever it was, and now it was here to claim me. "I didn't mean to," I whispered, feeling the weight of my mistakes crashing down on me. "I didn't know." The creature's lips, or what passed for them, curled into something resembling a smile. "It doesn't matter. You brought him here." My heart skipped. "Him?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who?" The creature raised a bony hand, pointing to the woods behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. The trees seemed to part, revealing a figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was tall, like the creature before me, but more human in appearance. It was wearing tattered clothing, and its face was obscured by the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. "Baxter?" I gasped, my mind reeling. The figure took a step forward, and my legs buckled. I fell to the ground, clutching Baxter's collar in my hand as the realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. The thing that wore his shape was just a mockery, a twisted reflection of what I had lost. The creature had taken him and left this thing in his place. The figure that once was Baxter stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its eyes were empty, lifeless, like marbles staring back at me with no recognition. A deep, guttural growl escaped its throat, but it wasn't Baxter's voice. It was something else, something monstrous. "You'll join him soon," the creature behind me whispered again, its voice thick with satisfaction. I scrambled backward, my hands slipping in the dirt. I had to get away, but there was nowhere to go. The trees seemed to close in around me, the shadows swallowing the last bits of light. The thing that had once been my loyal companion was closing in, its growl rising into a horrible, echoing roar. In that moment, I realized what the creature meant. It didn't want to kill me, it wanted to change me. To twist me into something else, just like it had done to Baxter. And in my final moments, as the darkness engulfed me, I heard it. Baxter's bark echoing through the woods. But this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a call. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.